Well, good morning, Bradley. Thank you ever so much for giving up your time to speak with me this morning. So before we get into a conversation about reputation and the value of reputation, I'd like to talk about who you are and where you're from. So we at Ipsos have had the pleasure of working with worldsteel now for, I think, over 10 years at least. And you are head of communications at worldsteel at the moment. And I've most recently worked with you in 2023. And we've done a lot of work together actually over the last couple of years. And I'm really excited to talk about all of the work you've been doing. But I think for a lot of the people that would be watching or listening to this, they'd like to know a little bit about worldsteel and what it is, who you are and what you do. So can you tell us a little bit about worldsteel?
Sure, with pleasure. So my name is Bradley Ford. As you said, Tom, I'm head of communications here at the World Steel Association, or worldsteel as we shorten it to. It's the global trade association of the global steel industry. We're based here in Brussels, but our membership, which includes, of course, steel producers, as well as national and regional steel associations, research centres, and other organisations involved up and down the steel value chain. We bring them all together. We align messaging and we amplify that messaging to the outside world.
Brilliant. It's a nice succinct introduction to worldsteel, but it's a large and complex association with huge reach and breadth, I guess. And this is what makes, I think, from my point of view, the reputation research we've been doing for you very exciting, given the very truly global nature and all the complexity that brings with what you do. But I'd like to just understand a little bit about your role as head of communications. And I guess the best thing to do is to describe what is a week or a day in your life. What is the typical things you get up to?
Well, you're quite right to stress that it's a complex association with members really all over the world. China, as you may know, accounts for more than half of global steel production. After that, the second biggest steel producing country is India. We have members in all of the top steel producing countries. So to go down the list after India, that would include Japan, the United States, Korea, Russia, etc. We really are all over the world, which means that the issues that we're dealing with on weekly and daily bases are very varied and can be very complex. What an average day looks like here, that will depend to a very great extent on what the members ask us to do, in fact. We're a member-driven organisation, and they will want us to perhaps look into the dynamics of other industries that are associated with steel. So that might be the mining industry in terms of iron ore. It might be the energy production industries, renewable energy, hydrogen production. These are things that are of increasing interest to the steel industry and for all steel producers. And the members often want us to investigate the dynamics of what is happening there in various places around the world.
It's really interesting that you think about all of those steel using industries you just talked about. They in themselves are facing very complex issues. And actually we're living in a world of what's been described as polycrisis, quite a lot. Lots of conflicting challenges going on, lots of really big, meaty issues. And if you think about all of those countries that are involved in producing steel, you can see that loads of different issues facing different countries and different aspects of the steel value chain at different times. So, in that context, reputation building for steel must be quite a big challenge, especially given all of the different angles in which you can go down and all the different angles in which external observers are coming to appraise steel and its impact on the world and what it enables, and perhaps some of the things that it spurs in terms of growth. Economic footprint is large, it's huge, in fact, and also the creative ways in which steel is used. So you can see there's already loads of different facets to reputation building and loads of different challenges that will represent for communicators in particular. So just thinking of maybe the last couple of years, there's been a lot of big ticket challenges globally, but also some of those are quite long in the tooth. If you take sustainability or climate change, they're very perennial issues, certainly in the industries you just talked about. But what do you see as the kind of the top three challenges for the reputation of steel? Well, if I think about steel as an industry first, but also interested in steel as a material. But as an industry, what do you see as the biggest?
Well, I think it would depend on who you're asking, first of all, and the outside world, to a great extent, will have a different answer to that question to what the members would consider their top priority. It's certainly the case that for the membership, safety and health is the most important area of work and area in which they communicate to the outside world. The safety and health of our employees, according to our own board, is the number one priority. I think, however, that increasingly as countries, national governments make net zero commitments to 2050, 60, 70, and perhaps in some cases beyond that, probably climate change and the contribution that steel makes to specifically carbon dioxide emissions is the issue that external stakeholders most want us to communicate about. And then perhaps an issue that both internally and externally we're keen to communicate on is the we call it the focus on our people internally. So that covers the education and training of our workforce, it covers diversity, equality and inclusion. And in many cases, it will cover this emerging concept called the just transition, which is reskilling, restructuring the steel industry as we move into a more, let's say, more environmentally friendly, less carbon intensive industry in the future.
So no small challenges then. And these are all topics that certainly in my line of work as a reputation specialist, we think about a lot. There's, particularly, let's start with safety. It's a really interesting one, particularly in industries that have an element of safety challenges to them, which is very prominent in the energy sector, in heavy industry and so on. And I know firsthand, having seen a lot of the presentations I've had the pleasure of being in front of you for, there's a huge ecosystem focused on safety, and it's very relentless. And lots of very dedicated teams really pushing standards, transparency, and so on. But in reputation terms, I think it's an interesting dynamic, because with safety, you need absolute safety for there to be no reputational risk. But that's possibly a very, very difficult thing to achieve. So it's one of these things that you have to perennially communicate about. What do you think of the opportunities for the industry in that case? Given that the amount of work that is done to measure the extent to which the industry is operating in a safe way, there's very granular statistics I've seen that you publish openly. Well, actually, I guess my main question is: does it help open doors with your stakeholders? The way in which you've gone about this as an association, as a group, has that almost radical transparency about safety incidents and so on in the industry? Has it led to more fruitful dialogue with stakeholders, or do you think it's still a work in progress?
I think it's always going to be a work in progress, because the ways that we make steel are constantly changing. I mentioned hydrogen earlier. Now, as the industry moves to use hydrogen instead of reducing iron ore in a blast furnace with coking coal in the future to a greater extent, the safety challenges that the steel industry faces most commonly are changing as well. So issues around the transportation of hydrogen, combustion, working with potentially harmful gases is something that wouldn't have been true for the steel industry to this extent 10, 20 or 30 years ago. So making sure that our external stakeholders, and indeed internal stakeholders, our employees, etc., know that we are ready and preparing for these safety and health challenges is really important. And it makes the transition easier, of course, the extent to which we are ready and understand the changes that are coming down the line.
So that kind of proactive stance is very helpful in engaging stakeholders, because it's something that in any industry where safety is an issue, and there's injuries or human lives at risk, it's very, very important and very emotive. And so do you find that degree of proactivity, but also the nature of your approach, leads to more support from stakeholders? And do you think that's working out in a sense that you have more effective collaborations and so on to help you advance safety progress in this industry?
Definitely. And the granularity with which we collect data, as you alluded to, only helps us with that. We're constantly expanding the data that we're collecting. Perhaps in the past it would be the case that We would collect data on fatalities, serious injuries, etc. Now we are collecting data even on accidents that people have on their commutes to work. And we are expanding this field to the greatest possible extent to make sure it's the safest industry in the world.
Fantastic. Well, it's all very laudable stuff and really impressive. I'd like to also talk about the changing nature of the industry and the innovation that's going on. And steel is everywhere is something that is spoken about a lot. And it's interesting from a reputational point of view. It's almost a double-edged sword. I think it's a more beneficial statement of fact than it is a negative one. But you have two camps. On the one hand, we know that steel is integral to building the technologies we need for renewable energies, for example, wind turbines and so on. But on the other hand, the ubiquity of steel can also lead to some criticism in terms of the volumes produced and so on. How are you as an association wrestling with that kind of challenge, or do you find it doesn't come up at all, given the sheer breadth of communications that exist out there around the ubiquity of steel and the benefits that brings?
No, it's certainly a challenge. And indeed, although on a per ton basis, the CO2 footprint of steel is decreasing and has decreased quite significantly over the last 50 years, let's say, because there is increasing demand for it, the percentage of global CO2 emissions the industry accounts for, which is currently between 7 and 9%, we estimate, may go up in the future as other industries which are easier to decarbonize move forward in that area faster than we do. But indeed, you're right to stress that those industries wouldn't be able to do it without steel in the first place. So not only wind turbines, but solar panels, nuclear energy, all the infrastructure that you need for geothermal energy and storing and transporting energy, including the renewable energy of the future, that all requires a foundation of steel. So that's a message which we're always keen to stress, of course, but which, because it's incontrovertibly true, we find people are very receptive to.
It's hard to deny, isn't it? And it's a statement of fact. I think actually what I've personally found working with you is the ubiquity of steel it goes beyond what I would have previously imagined. I think there's possibly something a bit naive, sort of an image of, for example, out at the back of your building here, you have big steel girders. I don't think about the way in which steel is genuinely in so much of everyday life and how integral it is. So I think that's a very interesting one, but also a nice, simple concept in the face of what is a hugely complex challenge in terms of you mentioning moving towards net zero, reaching those targets, reporting on scope 3 emissions and all of these things. I think the nature of the debate perhaps around climate change and the reputational impact that has is more nuanced and more complex than the initial kind of headlines might suggest. So it's an interesting one to manage. But you mentioned in the context of safety, but I know more broadly that the association produces an awful lot of data to support the industry and so on. And of course, I'm a big fan of data in our reputation intelligence. It's core to helping us produce advice for our clients by bringing all the disparate data sources together to try and understand what are the reputation imperatives, where are the risks, and what can you perhaps do about it. But I'd like to sort of, before I get into that in a bit more detail, to grill you on how you're using the data. I mentioned at the beginning of our chat that you've been, the World Steel has been measuring its reputation and also the reputation of steel as a material for a long time. And you continue to do so. So it's really interesting because quite often reputations take a long time to change. And sometimes when you have data sets where there is really incremental and slow improvements or progress towards goals or goals change, then the need for reputation research also changes. And what is it that drives your need for reputation research, and what motivates World Steel to continue measuring its reputation?
Well, for us, it's extremely important, the reputation research that we do with you. We, of course, know what we want to say, and we think, a rough idea of what people think about us, but we need that hard empirical data in the most important steel producing regions to make sure that issues, first of all, to make sure that our messages are cutting through, and secondly, to make sure that there are no emerging reputational issues that we're not aware of. So we do this research and iterations of every 3 or 4 years. So it's on a fairly regular basis to make sure that we're on top of everything. And with the results of that, we're always tweaking our key messages and our messaging strategies to make sure that we're, of course, addressing any of these issues that are coming up and continuing to stress the messages that have already taken hold. We don't want people to forget those as well, of course.
So it's got a lot of uses in that sense. So on the one hand, you're seeing if messages have landed, so it's sort of a retrospective, a sort of look back at what's shifted in that time period. And I'd like to come back to that, but I'm also quite interested in how it is helping you future-proof the reputation of steel, because I think that's what's been really interesting to me is the sheer ecosystem that seems to surround the research and your use of it. I've had the privilege to attend Concos and Steelcom 8 the other week here in Brussels, and your member associations have done a lot of work and have done a lot of strategic messaging to address some of the challenges that steel is facing. Is this something you always planned to do, or is this something that has evolved over time, that future-facing look, and also the extent to which you encourage your members to really use the data and use it in their planning?
We always encourage the members to use the data, use it in their planning, and in some cases to use our research as a foundation for their own research, to go into more granular detail in their countries or regions. Because we see that there are different reputational issues, of course, in different countries and different regions around the world. When you asked me if it's always future looking, I think it always has been, and the reason we do it is precisely for that, so that we can identify an emerging challenge and then start collecting data on it, so that we are able to counter any narratives that start emerging, perhaps as a result of this emerging narrative in whichever country. It probably won't surprise you to hear that climate change is an increasing reputational concern everywhere, actually. And so it's because we see this happening that we are collecting more and more data, not only about our CO2 emissions, but also about wider environmental questions as well. So water use, dust emissions, emissions of other greenhouse gases, all these we see when you dig down into the interviews that we do, come up more and more frequently. So we know that we need to get ready because people are going to be increasingly trenchant in their questions to us.
That's really interesting about being ready. And I think the work we do for you is a mixture of stats, quant numbers, and also the open-ended feedback. And is it the open-ended feedback where we bring the voice of the stakeholder to the steel industry? Is that where you get those clues more often than not, or is it the combination that makes that particularly useful of the stats and then the why behind them?
It's certainly a combination. The stats are invaluable, of course, but when you see in different countries and different regions the reasons behind the stats that we're getting, that's a really valuable insight indeed.
And it certainly stimulates lots of conversation from members when we have the opportunity to chat over coffee. So I guess I know that there's also the tweaking your messages, being ready to address challenges. Is there an element of risk management involved in this as well? I'm thinking about all of those issues and those data streams you just talked about. They're very relevant to the ESG topic and ESG reporting and ESG debate. Is it used in a risk management context as well, or is it more often than not that proactive approach that you're taking?
No, it is used in a risk management process as well. We actually find in the reputation research that safety and health doesn't come up so much. I mentioned that is perhaps not an area in which the external world asks us so many questions on a regular basis. But not being ready to address it if an issue does come up would be, of course, hugely remiss of us if we weren't anticipating this kind of problem. So indeed, it's hugely important.
So I like that word, anticipating. So I think a lot of the way I think about reputation is about anticipating what's around the corner and thinking about, well, what do we do now about these challenges? And thinking about some of those we've talked about, very big ticket challenges here, safety, climate change, and also work people in the industry. Of those, is it climate debate and the wider sustainability debate that you think is going to become the biggest ticket challenge of those in the future, or do you think that they're all a bit of a Venn diagram that go hand in hand, or is it both?
They're a Venn diagram to some extent, but I think for the steel industry, climate change is going to be the issue that poses the biggest reputational threat for us for the foreseeable future. I think that's unequivocal.
Okay. So thinking about the activity between every 3 or 4 years we have a measurement. So what's been really interesting to me is that reputation is like an oil tanker. It takes a long time to turn it around. And there's a huge amount of activity that seems to refer back to the data that you have from us and other sources as well. What's the driving factor behind that? Is it the members are clamoring for you to continue to refer back to those results to see what's changed, what's moving, what new activities have been put in place to address those issues? I'm just very keen to understand the dynamics. Where do the needs come from? Is it just part of a long program of planning that you have a point in time where you understand the reputation in whatever year it might be, and then think about the next 4 years? Or is it a mixture of a load of different things that shape your activity, your messaging, your thinking about your strategic aims and so on?
So what we do is we take the results from the reputation research and we approach our communications committee, which is made up of members, senior vice presidents, heads of communications from members all over the world. We say to them, these are the results we've got. What is it that we should do with this? And in most cases, we will tweak, perhaps sometimes significantly update what we think are our key messaging areas. So from the latest iteration, we decided that we needed 5 messaging areas, which is down from 9 previously. And then with some input, the members might say, oh yeah, but we're hearing from our customers or from our other stakeholders that this is very important. It didn't really come out in the reputation research. So it's really a process of using the feedback from the members and the work that you do for us. And then we update the messaging areas. And as part of that, we are in a constant process of then updating our position papers, producing materials that the members can translate and disseminate on social media, on their other channels, in their own countries or regions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to pick up on a point that you mentioned that, and this is always a peril in research generally. But it's interesting that that the members are talking about what they hear from their customers, and then what the research shows, and sometimes those things could be at odds with each other. Now, quite often, my interpretation of this, I think research is well done and well designed, is that the customers don't always tell you the unvarnished truth directly, but they will do via a third party. But it's interesting how you're joining the dots between those two things, and given that tension, though, sometimes if you're hearing from your customers one thing, then research tells you another, it can feel quite at odds. You don't know quite how to deal with it. But I've seen a lot of work from your members, nonetheless, building from the reputation research, for example, to embark on awareness-raising programs around ubiquity of steel, for example. So do you ever find there's perhaps any tension with what people see in the results of research versus their lived experience of dealing with customers or other stakeholders, or do you think they are broadly complementary?
I think they're probably broadly complementary. I think it's also the case that the customers in particular are probably quite honest with what they want from the steel industry. They have their own customers that they need to convince to buy their own product. So when it comes to the sustainability of the steel that they're using in their cars or their buildings, let's say, it's important that they're honest with us. I think something that comes to my mind immediately about the complementary feedback that we get from members and what we see in the research is a persistent issue that we struggle with in the steel industry, in that the industry is viewed as quite old-fashioned, 19th century industry that had its heyday in the Industrial Revolution, etc. And the feedback we hear from members is that they struggle to hire fresh recruits straight out of university. The engineers are all more interested in X, Y, or Z because they think it's more modern, they think it's more cutting edge. And that's something we really try and counter in that there are thousands of different grades of steel, hundreds being produced every year to operate in extreme temperature conditions, heat, cold, etc. So we really want to stress the modernity of the steel industry and how it can still offer very exciting career path for many different kinds of people. And we hear that from the members, and we see it in the reputation research. So that's encouraging in a way. It would be worrying if there were too much tension, I think,
yes.
between the research and what we're hearing from the members.
Absolutely. It's an interesting one, isn't it? So lots of industries face a similar challenge in terms of the attractiveness of the industry as an employer, and as something, for want of a better phrase, a sexy industry to work in. So we quite often hear the battle for graduates with STEM education in STEM subjects going to tech firms, for example. And so it doesn't matter whether you're in banking or whether you're in energy industry, for example, you're all fighting over those people with a similar skill set. But I see a lot of activity, a lot of dedicated teams actually at worldsteel, and also your members, to attract talent and to celebrate the success of the talent doing innovative things at early stages in their career. And it's something we only touched on lightly in the reputation research. But do you think that's going to become a battleground for the future? So the way I'm coming at this is, you think about the context and all those big challenges that the industry is facing. It needs a new intake of people constantly for the next couple of decades to try and solve the challenges that both the industry but also the industries that use steel face. Is there anything around steel's reputation that you think needs to be better understood by those looking for jobs you're seeking to employ? And what might that be? I'm just very interested to understand.
Well, something we're quite keen to get across, especially because we see in the reputation research that younger people are particularly concerned with environmental challenges, is that we want to make it clear to them that if that is your concern, you should come and work for the industries that are hard to abate or have a particular environmental impact, because we need your help, we need your brains, we need your enthusiasm for making the industry more sustainable. So we would highly recommend that the Greta Thunbergs and others of the world come to the steel industry, because that enthusiasm and passion for making it more sustainable is what we need.
Mm-hmm. Is that true collaboration and of hearts and minds, I guess, which is an interesting one. And that's, of course, fundamental to reputation. It's not all just about facts. It is very much a heart and mind issue. And well, I guess I'd like to sort of dig into the process of reputation insights itself, because you've worked with us for a while, and I'm sure with others as well, because there's a lot of data that worldsteel collects and shares with its members and reports it produces. What is the most useful thing agencies can do when trying to help you solve the problems that the reputation research investment is intended to address? What are you looking for when you work with agencies, or indeed in communications contexts?
I think the most useful thing is for your help in putting us in touch with the right people to get the right answers from them. And indeed your help in making sure that we're asking the right questions to indeed make sure that we are eliciting the truth from them, and making sure that they're not telling us anything that's contradictory or that's useless for us. So that's extremely useful from our point of view.
Sure. So from my point of view, the collaborative nature of the process of designing both the samples, so where we go, making sure we're covering the countries who are the largest steel producers, but also through to the questionnaire design itself, was a very, very collaborative experience. And I think for me, certainly, it's only possible to give you useful information if we have that dialogue along the way. But equally, we do have a design that's, we've got a lot of constants, I think, over the last 10 years and so on. And so there's a real tension there between what do you track and what do you not. And I'm just interested about sometimes the decision not to look at an issue that has been important for the last few years and not now. Is that kind of decision driven by members' needs, or just the fact you understand the context in which you're communicating? And it's quite interesting to see what drives change in terms of what we're seeking to understand and measure in a reputation sense.
I think, broadly speaking, in our case, the questions that we ask remain the same. In our case, what changes most significantly is the other industries that we want people to talk to us about. And the dynamics of those industries might develop in such a way that industrial material X or Y is becoming an increasing competitor of the steel industry. So we need to understand what the reputational issues around that are, so that we're in a better position to challenge their claims perhaps, or not, as might be appropriate. So we used to ask questions about industries like paper, which for us are not so relevant anymore.
Mm-hmm. Sure. It's interesting though. I'd like to just get your point of view. Have any industries stood out to you as being very effective at managing and improving their reputation in any context, not necessarily those that you're particularly interested in the context of steel, but have you seen any really good case studies out there, either industries or individual companies that have managed to turn something around?
Yeah, definitely. There's some very impressive work on safety by the oil and gas industry. I think on the carbon emissions topic, the concrete and cement industries are doing a very good job. The aluminium industry has its strengths as well. So we're learning a lot from our competitors, of course, as well. I hope they say the same about us also.
Sure. And well, they could certainly, given you're very transparent about your stats and the information you have, they could well do that. So this is a bit of a very self-serving question, but what is particularly, what do you really want to get out of day-to-day working relationships from an agency like Ipsos? Is there anything that we do particularly well? But on the other side, what could we do even better than we are to really make a difference to the reputation of steel and your job in trying to shift it?
Well, we couldn't do it without an agency like Ipsos. We don't have the expertise here. As I mentioned earlier, I'm sure that we would phrase the questions in a way that wouldn't elicit the most honest or transparent responses. So our work with Ipsos was absolutely invaluable. We've done, I think, this is the fourth or fifth iteration of the reputation research that we've done now. The sixth one is not so far away in the future, so we'll continue to look forward to working with you on that in the coming years.
Thank you. It'll be interesting to see which stats change, because we know that some of the stats we saw before, from my point of view, I looked at them and they were quite positive. I thought, okay, there's the endless recyclability of steel, for example, and I thought that was a fairly promising stat in that it was also better than the other materials we were looking at. But I remember you being disappointed. So it'd be interesting to see if we're going to see any shifts in that.
Yes, on that one in particular, steel is 100% and infinitely recyclable without any loss of properties. And that is something that we've been stressing ceaselessly to the outside world. And although that seems to be better known in comparison to other materials, indeed, I was a little disappointed that the gap between us and the others were not bigger. But we continue to work on that, and hopefully we'll see us storming ahead in the future.
Indeed. So keep plugging away and see what happens. Well, I think that is the questions I have for the moment. Thank you very much for speaking with me.
Thank you. My pleasure.
What's really useful to help me understand the role of reputation research is actually to understand what your job looks like and what's involved in it on a yearly basis or on a planning basis. So, how do you go from strategy to planning to action? If you could give me an example of what your job looks like in a year, and where does reputation feed into that? At what stages?
Well, the reputation research really forms the basis of our whole strategy. Once we have commissioned that, and once we get the results, we take them to our communications committee. We get some feedback from them about what they think matches with their experience in their own countries and regions. We will then, with their input, come up with a plan that needs to be approved by our executive committee and board. That meets twice a year. Normally, the main board meeting is in October. So once that is approved or not by them, we might have to go back, make some tweaks for it then to be approved at the next board meeting, which will take place in April of the following year. But once it is approved, which will include, of course, the establishment of KPIs, it will include targets for meeting them at various intervals before the next iteration of the research. Once that's approved, we then go away and start implementing that. And that might involve, for instance, the update of publications, policy papers. It will include plans for who we're targeting with particular messages, where and when on social media and other platforms. And we report back to the Communications Committee and then the Executive Committee on a regular basis, on 6 monthly basis, for them to update the strategy or make suggestions on how to update the strategy as they see appropriate.
Interesting. I'd just actually like to pick up on the point you mentioned there about data and social media. There's so much data that you could have access to at the moment. How do you make sense of all this? Obviously, our research is just one piece of information amongst loads of other bits of input, whether it's information for the members, other data sources you have. How do you go about that to begin with?
Well, we have to be quite strict with ourselves, I think. Otherwise, indeed, we can find ourselves lost with too much information that it becomes, especially because we're a global association with different results from different regions, it becomes too complicated to make a coherent strategy that will work for us at World Steel. But to an extent, that's not something that we have to manage on a granular level. We are producing really guidelines and a framework and an overall messaging area for the members to then go away, particularly the national and regional associations, to then go away and translate, for lack of a better word, those message areas into what works best in their own countries and regions. And indeed, they'll go away and do that. They'll report back to us at the Communications Committee meetings, for example, and they'll say, well, we're getting a lot of traction with message A, less so message B, and we can, in many cases, get an idea of why that's the case and make tweaks as appropriate to benefit them.
And I'd like to talk to you now about the value you get from reputation intelligence and working with agencies. And we talked a little bit about this earlier on, but what more should we be doing or thinking about doing to provide better, more detailed advice or intelligence for World Steel? Is there anything else that we could sort of add beyond the survey findings that helps you make sense of the reputation landscape and do something about it?
Sure. Well, we're of course getting very specific information about the steel industry when we're doing our reputation research, but to a very great extent, we need to know what's going on very broadly for other industries and in other areas as well. So we need to know what the latest thinking is in terms of environmental sustainability. We need to know what the latest thinking or concerns are in terms of diversity, equity and inclusion, etc., so that we're ready to incorporate the results that we get into what you tell us best practices are around the world, or the most keen threats are around the world as well. So any insight, as you do have, any insight that Ipsos has into what people consider the most important day-to-day challenges in their lives on whatever basis is really useful for us too. So
our global trends and our understanding of business, society, citizens is all very helpful in making sense of the numbers and that broader outside context. Excellent. And is there anything we should stop doing as researchers or advisors indeed? Or is that too hard to say?
I don't know. Is there something? No, I don't think so. No, I think carry on. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Bradley. I really appreciate taking the time to answer my questions today, and look forward to working with you again in the future.
Likewise. Thank you.